to talk to you later about. Okay, hi everybody. I am Tracy Stuckrath with Thrive Meetings and Events and the Eating at a Meeting podcast and live broadcast. And today is Wednesday, September 9th, and we're here to talk about sustainable seafood. One of our members asked about what is sustainable seafood a couple of weeks ago. And so I brought the one expert that I know about this, chef and cookbook author, Virginia Willis. Hello, my friend. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. It made me so happy to talk about sustainable seafood.
Well, that's good because a lot of people are confused by it. And even, Whole Foods is 2 hours away from me now. But when you go into Whole Foods, you've got the 1 through 5. And you can do that, but it's also still kind of confusing. Now I go into Harris Teeter and I don't know necessarily what to buy. So I prefer to go to the local guy down the street.
Right. Which unfortunately is not always sustainable either. Right. I mean, there's so many different levels. There's so many different levels of it.
Okay.
So the first thing I would say is Whole Foods is 2 hours away, but one good thing that Whole Foods does is that, they do many things, but one of the things that Whole Foods does is that they work in direct partnership with Seafood Watch, which is an organization that I am on the advisory board for, and Seafood Watch is great. So whether you're going to Whole Foods or Harris Teeter or your local guy, there's an app that you can download on your phone. And you're not looking at the store, so you have the opportunity to look at the species. So the app is called Seafood Watch, and you can download it on your iPhone, on your Android, on all the devices, and then basically you're able to put in the species, and it populates with is it farmed or is it wild? So there are a couple of questions, and the thing to consider is that it's unfortunately it is really confusing. So like not all farm seafood is bad and not all wild seafood is good, and the other way around. What does happen with the Seafood Watch is a really easy system. Green means go. Yellow means think about it. Red means don't do it. Right. So it's really it's just that simple.
Well, and my phone friend Nancy, who did ask this question, she's like, is she going to make me stop eating a specific fish? And I don't know if she downloaded the app, but I'd have to go find that email. I don't remember what it is, but
one of my favorite things on earth is stone crab. Like I love stone crab, and they recently were put on the red list. And so sadly, stone crab is no longer part of my diet, or no longer part of, a menu option for me. Bluefin tuna is on the endangered species list. It sounds so dramatic, but I'm going to do it. Eating bluefin tuna, eating toro, eating the bluefin tuna sushi at some fancy event, it's the equivalent of eating a mountain gorilla. It's the equivalent of eating polar bear, right? It's the equivalent of the species that we are about to remove from the planet and no longer will exist again. It's that dire.
Yeah.
It's that dire for some species, right? So we are able to fish longer and catch more, and the technology for fishing, we are literally harvesting species out of the ocean faster than they can reproduce.
Wow.
And so it does. It's like, oh my gosh, really? Seriously? Like, mountain gorilla, Virginia, are you kidding? But what I do have to say is it's not too late. We can turn a tide. But the thing to always remember is that what's on the end of your fork, you're voting with your fork, right? So if you make sustainable choices, that will help turn that proverbial tide.
So, and that's good. And it's hard to, when you're planning an event for a conference or even for, at home right now, because we're at home, it's kind of hard to sometimes do that. And I think the app, and I have used the app. To be honest, I haven't used it lately, but I have used it before. But, and the app was designed by Monterey Bay Aquarium, right?
Right.
Okay. And so that's the task force that you're on. So let's jump back a few minutes or a few seconds and say, okay, can you explain what that task force is?
Yeah. So Monterey Bay Aquarium is one of the preeminent aquariums in the world. And it is Julie Packard is a longtime director. They've had some trouble with obviously closings with COVID and layoffs and stuff like that, but it's one of the premier ocean health. It's not just about the fish. One of the ocean health advisors or entities in the whole entire world. And then so an offshoot of the Monterey Bay Aquarium is Seafood Watch. And Seafood Watch is an organization that is very specifically devoted to educating consumers about the health of our oceans. So that includes sustainability of certain fisheries. It also involves plastic usage, right? Because single-use plastics are horrible pollutants for the ocean. Seafood Watch also touches on human rights issues. I mean, some of these boats that go out for months at a time and fish in the Pacific are sadly staffed with slave labor, right? Wow. This is your can of tuna that you could get at Harris Teeter may have been caught by someone that is forced to be on a boat from slave labor. I mean, it's so mind-blowing.
Right.
So the Blue Ribbon Advisory Board, which is what I am a member of, is an advocacy activist group of chefs and culinary educators. And many of them, most of the people on this board are restaurateurs. And so they are trying to communicate to consumers by putting different items on their menu. And then I'm in a situation where I write about sustainable seafood, you know, in my books and in my blog and do videos and stuff like that. And so I'm trying to educate the consumer from an education standpoint, from a, you know, like what they're reading or taking a cooking class or things like that. So, but it's an outreach, direct outreach from the chef to the consumer.
Okay. Awesome. Well, and that's really important. And I was on their website earlier this morning, and I think one of the most important questions is what can you do? And the question is, what do you have any sustainable seafood when you're at a restaurant or you're a chef? You know, what do you source? You know, do you practice this?
Well, I mean, in my personal life, I only consume sustainable seafood. And if I'm involved with an event, like I had a situation last fall that was really pretty tricky. I was doing an event for the Human Rights Campaign, huge fundraiser in DC. Our table went for $35,000, which was, you know, huge money raiser.
Wow.
Broke a record for them. And one of the chefs that was meant to be do one of the courses, like as a group of chefs did the table, and like one chef does one course and the other chef does another course, etc. And one of the chefs, who is a Beard winner and super famous and all the things, announced what his menu item was going to be, and it was bluefin tuna. And I couldn't do that. So I emailed back and I said, hey, this is great. And I'm sure this is delicious, but I'm on the board of the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch Blue Ribbon Advisory Board, and I can't be at a dinner where you're serving bluefin tuna. And, you know, here I am, this like, you know, little cooker in comparison, like, you know, mega chef.
Right.
But he changed it. They changed the menu.
Wow.
Sometimes it's just important. I was nice about it. I wasn't shamed. I wasn't screechy. I wasn't preachy. I just kind of said, hey, this is my deal. And if you want to do that, I can't do it. And they changed the menu. So part of it, I think, is just assuming that now it's clearly not his thing. If he's got bluefin tuna on his normal menu, but communication, lines of dialogue, open minds, all of that is so important all the time, right? Especially with event planning, especially in the hospitality industry. So for me, I was a little nervous when I hit that send button, but all it took was for me to ask.
Right. Well, and you showed where you stood without being preachy or pissy or anything like that.
Right.
And
I didn't come out with guns
and
blaring. Yeah, I didn't come out like, how dare you? I didn't do any of that. It's just like, hey, this is my deal. I'll consider something else. And they did. So I think that, like, for consumers and for event planners, if there's a lot to believe in, there's a lot of different causes, everyone has their own thing. Everyone has their own agenda. The sustainable seafood is a highly personal to me because I grew up, my grandparents had a pond, and I've been fishing since I was a toddler, literally. Okay. And my grandfather taught me how to respect the pond. And so what happened was, it was like in the 90s at some point, Mark Kurlansky had a book that came out called Cod, The Fish That Feeds the World. And I read that book and I realized that, oh my gosh, we're catching the fish too fast. Like, I'd never thought of it. You don't think about what's below the ocean. And then and there and that day, I decided to become a sustainable seafood advocate. And I decided to do that. So I think that in terms of for event planners, we all have to choose what we want to advocate for. Hold on. I didn't do that one. But there are resources out there for people to use so they can make these plans.
Yeah. And I pulled up the app and it says, oh, you haven't used it in a while. We're re-downloading it. But like, we had blue crab on Friday or Saturday for the weekend, and it's got a green. Oops.
Yep.
Got a green. So I'm all good. That's good. That's good for my dad growing up in Baltimore, but we're in North Carolina. But it's interesting to look at that. And, you're looking at hotel menus, or the planners are looking at hotel menus all over the world and the country. And, salmon and salmon and sea bass and tuna are typical menu items, even when you're in Colorado or the middle of Texas. And you got to think about that.
Yes.
More differently.
So it's challenging too. So the 3 top species for the United States seafood consumption are salmon, shrimp, and tuna. So one of the things that you can do,
red ones, or just use purchased?
Just the most consumed, both sustainable, what's sustainable and not sustainable, right?
Okay.
So it's just the top 3 species of seafood consumption. So anytime you can take some pressure off one of those 3 species, preferably in a sustainable fashion, it's better. So Colorado, come on, Colorado, let's get some trout, mountain trout on those menus, right? Or Montana. Let's so, but the thing is, just like with everything else, it's creating the market. It's creating the demand. And there is an expression, like, you have to eat it to save it. So if we create, if no one ever questions the fact that there's unsustainable, not sustainable product available on a menu, and no event planner ever questions the hotel or ever questions the event facility, then it's going to definitely stay the same, right?
Right.
So, there's a way to do it. There's a way to go about it. And obviously we're in the industry, right? Like, part of it has to do with the food supply chain. Part of it has to do with these massive purchases that hotel groups do. Many of the hotel groups are paying greater attention to their carbon footprint. They're paying greater attention to sustainability. They have to, because the marketing end of it is just realizing the bad publicity. Bad publicity is a huge driving force. Yeah.
So 2 stories come to mind. Is one, this is really bad. I was in Shanghai a couple of years ago, and I went to this restaurant. I paid $150 for my dinner by myself. Didn't really realize that until after the fact, but whatever. But I had Boston lobster, and Virginia was done so well, but completely not a sustainable choice on my part. They put it inside a mason jar and steamed it with lemongrass and lime juice. and it was so good.
That
But
sounds delicious.
Definitely not a sustainable choice.
Well, well, not from a carbon footprint point of view. But, one of the problems in it always just like ripple effect, no pun intended, with our topic. But one of the issues lately with the tariffs in China is that that's one of the things that Trump opened up was American lobsters being sold to China, because Canadian lobsters don't know where the U.S. border and the Canadian border stops and starts, right? So they were just buying, the Chinese were just buying Canadian lobster. So, there's a lot to it. But I just always think that it's just important to try to make those choices, whether it's you as a single person, one solo person ordering something off a menu, or if it's you doing an event where you're feeding 100 or 500 or 1,000, and it sometimes it might be more expensive, and that's something that does happen, right? The $2.99 all you can eat shrimp at Long John Silver's, how could that possibly be sustainable, right?
Oh yeah. And I am very I had dinner the other night, and it was romaine lettuce with salmon or with shrimp on it, and the shrimp are like this big, like super tiny. I'm like, we live on the North Carolina coast, seriously. And there were only 4, and the salad was basically romaine lettuce with 4 tiny shrimp. And I'm like, you can make this salad for $15 so much better if you just go down to the local guy and buy the shrimp. But so jumping to you said farm raised and wild caught. I sat in a seminar a couple of years ago in Las Vegas, and this gentleman got up and talked about his farm raised fish and how better it is, but he had no certifications. He wasn't going to get anybody. He's like, trust me, I know what I'm doing. And I'm like, how can I trust you? And how can the chefs who are buying from you trust you if you don't have any third-party certifications? Is that really important?
And that's complicated, because a lot of the certifications you have to pay to be certified.
Right. And he didn't want to do that. He's just like, I'm doing it the right way, so trust me.
So I guess it would depend, right? How much the guy, how much the communication is there. I mean, there's third-party certifications are good. There's one thing to consider about farm raised fish, but like in general, super big, huge in general, but in general, closed system, above ground tanks are generally sustainable. So trout, for example, can be raised above ground. So the trouble that starts to happen is when there's farm raised seafood, whether that's fish or shrimp, that interacts with the natural environment. So for example, like Southeast Asian shrimp, Indian shrimp has had this huge problem in terms of sustainability because of environmental impact. It's not just the success of a fishery, meaning the species. Something like Seafood Watch takes into consideration a lot more information, and one of them is environmental impact. So the Southeast Asian farms, many of them, they destroy the mangroves to make a shrimp farm, and the mangrove is basically the nursery for the ocean. It has a lot to do with like water filtration and clean water. And another thing that happens with the shrimp farms is they're sort of proactively given antibiotics to keep disease down, because if you put too many animals in a cage, I don't care if it's a shrimp or a rabbit or a chicken or a human, if you put too many animals in a small space, they get sick, right? So not all Southeast Asian shrimp is not sustainable, and not all of it is, but the trouble with the farm raised in the ocean, one of the always red flags is that here's the ocean, here's the net, here's the farmed fish. That net doesn't stop disease transfer. If there's any genetic modification, it doesn't necessarily, the net won't stop it, reproduction with a wild species, and then now you've literally genetically modified the wild species, and who knows what's going to happen down the line. So the farm versus wild can be really confusing, even for people like myself who are just like up to literally just submerged in it, immersed in it. So for regular consumers and event planners, I'm certain that would be really challenging.
Okay, so the first question would be is where do you get your seafood from, and then do you follow sustainable practices, or looking at the Seafood Watch app? Yeah. Okay.
Seafood Watch app, also on MCS Marine Certified Stewardship Council. There's a couple now. Some of the grocery stores I've seen, and they preach there's all this like collateral around about our sustainable seafood, but it's like they've given themselves a gold star, right? It's not necessarily. You really have to do a little bit of research and trust. The Pew Institute always has good information.
Okay.
Watch is good. It's a blue check mark with MSC. That is good. Now that is a pay to play, and that is one of the things that the seafood farmer that you spoke of, it's no different than, say, organic, right? There's a lot of organic farmers that don't want to have to pay for that level of certification. But really, it's just about asking those questions. Species information is a really great place to start.
Okay.
So like sea bass on the menu, is that a sustainable fish? Or look at the species first, and then like say cod, for example. Well, Atlantic cod is completely not sustainable. We've been fishing St. George's Bank since the 1500s. There's no cod left, right? But Pacific cod is great. Pacific cod is sustainable. So it doesn't just mean like one fish is bad all over the world. It does a lot of the time. But, it also depends on where it's from. And then the second layer of that is how it's harvested. Okay.
That reminds me, there was a story a couple of weeks ago, I think it was on CBS, and they were talking about sharks. There's a news program about sharks and where they're almost extinct in certain parts of the world, but they're really prevalent in other ones. And it was interesting how they put cameras down in the ocean and were tracking the reefs and how many sharks went by. And this guy's mom, he's like, who counts these sharks? He's like, my mom does. So she'll just sit at the computer and watch the camera and count the number of sharks. I don't know how you tell a shark from a shark, but it's interesting. That's a whole conversation about, our oceans. But a couple of years ago, I was up at the Baltimore Convention Center, and they did we did a sustainability conference with the Events Industry Council, a sustainability training. And they had a group there, and they're going to get mad at me because I don't remember the name, but they were reclaiming the oyster shells. So putting that. So do you have any information on that? That I love that program. So it's putting them back into the bay to build the reef stuff, I guess, to help the oysters.
No, I don't know about that, but oysters are incredibly important because oysters are basically filters, right? And so oysters and mollusks like that are incredibly important to the health of the oceans and to the health of the waters. So if you're in an area that they're basically saying don't eat the oysters, then that water is usually terribly polluted.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because they are the filter feeders. And so if an oyster is not edible, local oysters are not edible, it's because the water is often too polluted. But part of the process of changing that, like to just always, it's so easy to just to go dire and horror and, oh my gosh, we're killing the planet. Right. It's really easy to go down that path. So what is important to consider is the things that are being done right. So one of the things that happened with the oyster beds is that we've trawled the bottoms of all these bays and coves, and there's no natural habitat for them anymore. So what they're doing by harvesting those shells and putting back into the shallow waters is essentially creating a nursery for new oyster growth. And then it sort of works that the more oysters that there are, the cleaner the water is, and so therefore they become edible.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. And I just Googled it while you were chatting. And this is one in Maryland and posted it. So oysterrecovery.org.
That's cool. I have to check that out too.
Yeah. And so you can actually take your oysters to specific places. Here in North Carolina, I think I looked it up, and I have to drive like an hour and a half to do that. Not that I don't want to do that, but an hour and a half to do it is a little bit far.
Yeah, you might want to save them up.
Right. And the smell of the oysters and all of that stuff in your car for that long.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I asked you before we got on here was safe and inclusive food and beverage. What does that mean to you? Because that's what we talk about. And actually it should be safe, sustainable, and inclusive. But I liked your answer. You're consuming mostly in your house right now. So that's the safest, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But food is not passed through COVID, or COVID is not passed through food. So, but it's the environments in the restaurants. And you and Kim had a great conversation a couple of months ago about going to a restaurant. And so can you talk a little bit about that? Thank
you for asking that question. And it gave me pause and made me think when I was writing my answer. I understand that COVID is not transferred through food. And yet last night I ordered takeout for the fourth time since February have I had food that wasn't prepared in my own kitchen. Right. So it's part of it. Part of it is that everyone
eats food all the time.
Say again?
You're a really good cook, so eating your food.
Well, I know, but I get tired of cooking every now and then, right?
That's true.
Yesterday, I was just like, oh my gosh, I've been having this hankering for pizza. And so I made this decision. Finally, I was like, I gave in to my craving. So it's really interesting looking at some of the statistics that are coming out about where people are in their home and in their head, right? So 65% of women don't want to go out to eat, according to Data Essential, which is a webinar that I follow in Chicago. The stats for men are a little bit lower, but I think it's kind of interesting because by and large, I think that women are probably doing most of the cooking. But women right now, they don't want to go out to eat because people don't feel safe. And I think another thing that's happened is that we've gotten sort of conditioned, stay at home, quarantine, no big groups, don't go out. There's still a lot of reason not to do that. There's still a lot of reason not to do that. I mean, there's the South is still red, right, with numbers. It's not as much the rest of the country, but we're going to see what happens after 2 weeks after Labor Day, right? So what can we do for people? I think that in terms of in terms of safety, like what I have seen restaurateurs do and event places do is obviously that spreading, because that's what people care about more than anything right now is safety. So if you feel like you're in a safe environment, that you feel like it's all about trust, that you can trust the people in the kitchen. And regardless of whether there's fact or not about COVID being passed through food, there's always going to be that perception. Yes.
And big perception. And there was a restaurant I went to a couple of months ago, and food safety practices. And I've done a bunch of webinars for planners on food safety. It's always been here. It's staying put. But these are the things we have to worry about. But in the kitchen, gloves and hats or nets were always required, but never face masks. And we've never really thought about that before. So it's hot in a kitchen, Virginia.
No kidding.
So, I mean, do you think that's going to be something going forward from the food code or anything?
Well, it might be, but then there's the problem that, there's the automatic problem about like everything from seeing folks wear the mask below their nose, which is completely ineffective, to not properly fitted masks, right? Like, so even if you're trying, it may be. I thought it was really interesting last week, and I purchased the Veriterra, the company that produces the plates out of palm fronds.
Okay.
You know, they're an awesome company. I've used them extensively. They make beautiful, sustainable plates and platters and boxes and stuff from palm frond. Anyway, so they're not doing a whole lot of that right now because there's not as many events. There's not blah blah blah. So I got an email last week from them. They're selling PPE, and I actually bought N95 masks from this company, from Michael, because I trust them.
Right.
Yep. Because I feel because I know what they do normally in the COVID world. And so as far as his knowledge is able to certify, if he believes that he is buying N95 masks, then I believe that he is selling N95 masks. It's really so much about perception and trust.
Right. It really is. And as it's really hard to find a hotel person in the kitchen right now, just because there's lots of different things going on, but taking this time to figure out how you can create that environment where people trust you coming back, into that food and beverage experience.
Well, and then one of the things that I saw, Chef Nico Romo from Charleston, the South Carolina government basically got together and created this list of suggestions for reopening and such. And I mean, he went off on this Facebook post because he's like, are you serious? That is standard operating procedure. Wiping down a table with customers, their bar was so low, right? That the government issued as, what was suggested was super low, because he was just like, we do that now already. So I hope that as these practices develop, it's the people that are actually in the kitchens, it's the servers that are actually in the conference rooms or in the banquet rooms or in the restaurants that are part of creating those systems and creating those best practices.
Yeah, because you've got government people over here creating something that they don't even know that it's already part of foods. And that's what I've been telling to meeting planners. I'm like, the Serve Safe certifications already demand this stuff, or already require this stuff to even have the restaurant and open the catering kitchen or anything. So you just have to ask for some different standards. Are you going above and beyond?
I'm doing an event in Montana. I'm excited and I'm nervous about it. I won't deny, but I'm doing a chef's weekend in Montana at the end of the month. And whereas normally the dinner would be 150 people, the state of Montana is not allowing that right now. And I'm not certain about what government entity is making that happen, but our dinners are limited to 50 people. So part of that was instead of us having 2 dinners of 150 people, we're having 3 dinners of 50. So that guest, it's basically the same dinner Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, but we're rotating the guests through. One of the things that's happening is, I know that it's definite now. There's no more buffets, and family style is out the window, and no one wants to be touching a plate that they don't know where that person came from. I don't want to do it. You know, and so just a lot more individually plated things. If there is a buffet, it's more along the lines of it's just much more controlled, and there's a server there managing it like at a carving station or something, as opposed to just letting people help themselves.
The other day I described it as the Chipotle line. You can go through Chipotle, and they pass the plate down versus you. Okay. Wow. Yeah. So on the promotion of this, I said sustainable seafood, which I think we've got covered. I don't have any questions from anybody, but I also said Southern food. And that's, I met you in Georgia, Southern, and Bon Appetit, y'all. And so we're a little bit over the 30-minute thing, but tell me what's going on in Southern food right now. Anything you're super excited about? I know you're doing some stuff with Atlanta.
I watched the Netflix series last night with Rodney Scott and barbecue, and I thought that was great. I think that people are just digging deeper into the stories. I think that we have incredible products. I think that the continuation of promoting heirloom and heritage is happening. People care about where their food comes from. When COVID has really shined a light on broken food systems. And so some of these smaller food systems are better for us as people and better for the planet in general.
I had Lori Moore on the show a couple of weeks ago, and Will was telling me a couple of weeks before that, he's like, I want to take the chairs out of the van so I can deliver more food to our customers because their CSA orders have just skyrocketed. Yeah. And I'm sure Charlotte's have too. And, it's really amazing how the local farmers, who are not the big conglomerates, but the local farmers are really, doing well. I was going to say making it.
No, it's great to see. And I think it, it's sad that this has had to happen, but it's good. There are some good things that are going to come out of this dark period. And I think that that's one of them.
Yeah. So do you have anything exciting coming up that you're doing that you want to tell anybody? Can you tell anybody?
Well, I think that one thing, and we did something together last fall with the food blogger. One thing that has become part of the business is the social video, from everything from podcasts like this, but we all have a movie camera in our pocket. And one of the things that I'm excited about is the culinary media training business that I started doing with my friend and colleague Cynthia Grabart, and just trying to help people tell their story, right? Yeah, just trying to, whether that's someone like Laurie and Will, a farmer, or our fisherman, or whatever. It's like social video is our communication now, and so helping people be able to tell that story. So that's a really fun offshoot of something I've been doing for a long time.
Yeah. And I took video training from you, so that's great. Always smile. That is the one thing that you
That's true.
Ingrained in our brains, that whole for that 3-hour class.
Your cheeks hurt.
Yep. There is a farmer that I want to introduce you and Cynthia in San Francisco. W.D. Dickinson Farm, and she's Heirloom. I'll send you the link on my website, but she got bit by a tick and got Lyme disease, but she didn't know it for 4 years. And so it really wreaked havoc on her body. And after doing, self-testing and whatever, she found out she can only eat heirloom vegetables.
Wow.
And so she and her husband bought this farm outside of San Diego and only grow heirloom. And they have CSA boxes that are specific to diabetes or candida or things like that.
That's so great.
Yes. And I met her. Yeah.
Food is medicine.
It really is. And so I'll make sure that I introduce you guys to her because she's fantastic.
Oh, that sounds so cool. It's so great to see what you're doing. And I think it's so important. It's so important because at the core of all of this it's the hospitality industry, right? And so people, whether it's an allergy or a personal reason or whatever it is, we're in the hospitality business, and people need to feel they need to be well fed and well fed on more than one level. Yes.
And it's every meal matters.
Every meal matters.
Every meal matters. That is my new little mantra that I am going to stick with for a long time. Okay, so I just posted your website on here, and anywhere on social media, we find you at Virginia Willis, or what is it?
If people go to my website, thank you so much for doing that. If people go to my website, virginiawillis.com, there's little links at the top of everything. I have a weekly blog with a recipe and some events and some fun stuff. And I've got some great videos coming up, and it's National Biscuit Month. So, I've got stuff going on for that. And but this is great. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about sustainable seafood, and it's a big passion project for me. And so I'm grateful, very grateful for you to allow me this opportunity. Thank you.
Okay. So somebody named Jenny B. Willis just said, I just loved every minute of this conversation.
I can't imagine who that is. Hey, Mama.
Oh, hi, Mom. And I love all your videos with her and your pictures with her. And there The one a couple of weeks ago, though, when she wouldn't get on camera because she didn't have makeup on, that's my mom too.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's it.
Yeah.
My mama.
Yep. And one, I just want to remember, you have sweet potato grits recipe. Which cookbook is that in again?
That I think is in Basic to Brilliant, y'all. But basically it's grits and you just cook some sweet potatoes in it at the same time. And it's sort of this sweet potato grits mashup.
Well, I never really ate sweet potato like 6 months ago, but I made that a couple of years ago and I shredded the sweet potatoes and put it in there. That is the best grits I've ever had.
That makes me feel so happy. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yay. So, well, Virginia Willis, thank you so much for being on the Eating at a Meeting.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank y'all for watching, and thank you, Mama, for watching, and it was really great to see you, and I appreciate it.
You're welcome, and I will make sure that I see you when I'm in Atlanta next.
That sounds good. That sounds good, and I'll post this out and share it.
All right. Thanks, Virginia.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.